look at the degree of autonomy and self-determination of a people and communities through real estate. This is important when we talk about representing interests of responsibility and acting in a self-determined way when it comes to authority. We're going to discuss issues such as cash flow deductions, appreciation, equity, tenancy, landlording issues, what it means in the times of COVID-19. Currently, home ownership within the USA is at approximately 64 to 65%. So today we're going to just, discuss what community means, what empowerment through real estate means, and we can even look to issues of segregation within Chicago and how we can go ahead and try to empower and build people up that are around us during a time of a pandemic when a lot of people are out of job. So let's go over to Anna. Do you have any issues that you want to explore more specifically to ask our panelists today? We've got Edwin Hanna, we've got Michael Scanlon here to discuss, possible empowerment via real estate.
Yeah, I don't know too much about this topic, so I'm more of a learning participant, but I probably won't have questions or comments later on.
Okay. I know David Rich had some reservations about real estate. We'll just look and explore what he has to say in his take. It may not necessarily not be correct, but or something that people want to explore or decide for themselves. But we're here open as a forum for people to sit in, and we want a direct representation of the difference in opinion that may be housed by people. So David, why don't you just go ahead and talk a bit more about your reservations when it comes to real estate?
Well, philosophically and politically, I think that the general idea of property is problematic to me, in that I think you can reduce a lot of the human problems and issues down to this notion of property, that this land and these resources are mine and not yours. This food is mine and not yours. This soil is mine and not yours. And wars are usually started over land and resources and the notion of property. This is mine and not yours. This belongs to this country and not this country. That whole thing. I mean, the whole notion of immigration and open borders ties into the notion of property. It's a very vast and pervasive problem in my estimation. However, more specifically to the notion of the market of real estate, at least in this country, you had things like redlining laws, and real estate market was really used as a way to like segregate and suppress and oppress minorities throughout American history after the Civil War, where African Americans were not allowed to buy real estate in certain areas, period, end of story, because they were Black. And so it wasn't used as a means of empowerment. It was specifically used as a means of control and disempowerment. So I'm really curious, but I understand the power of real estate in this country. For the longest time, it was considered one of the better investments to have, because the price always goes up. Which itself is a problem too, because now it's going up so far that less and less people can afford it. The ratio between the cost of real estate and the wages earned going up is completely disproportionate. It is not proportionate at all. It's ridiculous. You're marginalizing the middle class. You're reducing the middle class. Real estate is a huge problem in this country. So I would like to hear what Michael and Edward have to say about empowering through real estate, because I am very curious to what that means.
All right, Ed, why don't you start there? David gave us a whole bunch of issues that we have to deal with. We was attacking the system, so to speak, which is fine. I understand where he's coming from, but what can you tell us as a person who has experience in real estate?
Well, one thing is for sure, we're the only animal on the face of the earth that has to pay for the place we live.
Thank you.
If you think about it. And it has been used to segregate us. Like, for example, certain people, I've actually driven in a neighborhood where I got pulled over just for driving in that neighborhood, because it was a neighborhood where the type of car I was driving, even though it was a new car, it was a rental car, It's just not the type of car that drives in that neighborhood. And near Beverly Hills, I actually got pulled over and was questioned about what I was doing there, you know. And I know I'm definitely not the most victimized class either. Usually it's weaker people. A lot of times women are harassed. A lot of times African Americans are harassed. Mexicans too shouldn't be in certain neighborhoods, according to certain people. Or if they are, we better check them, you know, unless it's during the hours when those guys are doing the lawns, you know, then it's okay, you know, that kind of stuff. But as David Rich mentioned too, redlining, now they teach us in real estate school about how much of a no-no it is. And I actually, when I was early in my real estate career, I saw 6 real estate offices on the south side of Chicago, in the Ashburn area, got busted redlining, and 2 of them were let go. 2 of them were fined $250,000, and 2 of them were told they were so bad they couldn't be in business anymore. They literally got ran out of business because they had done so much. But even in my early days, I've had clients even ask me, you know, I promised my neighbors I wouldn't sell to this type of person, but, you know, or whatever. And I'm like, well, look, when you leave, what do you care? You're not here anymore. What does it matter to you? So you have to try to be sensitive with your client, but yet your client is literally saying something that's illegal. And it's not because that was a bad person. That's the way their upbringing came. They were older, you know, locked into their thoughts of how it was in the old days or whatever. And that's how it was. Now, when it comes to in the empowerment angle, it is kind of important. I mean, people like to control where they live, and they like to live separate enough and have enough privacy that if you turn your music too loud, the neighbors aren't, you know, complaining. Or if they don't like your type of music, well, at least you can keep it to yourself if you're in your own separate house and you're not living in an apartment. So it has that value too. But also, a lot of people for the future build equity that way. As they're making payments on their house, a certain portion is going towards principal and certain parts going to interest. And as you pay your loan, the amount that's going towards principal is getting bigger and bigger and bigger every month. So each month that passes, you own more of your house. A lot of the tax benefits were taken away. And in the most recent tax bill that passed, you're limited to 10,000 of state tax, sales tax, and real estate tax. I know some people that pay that much just in real estate tax. So the income tax that they have withheld from their check doesn't count. And since they doubled the standard deduction, then a lot of people are finding that hard to overcome. But one benefit that is for everyone is that you get to escape capital gains tax on up to $250,000 per spouse, as long as you lived in the house 2 out of the last 5 years. So there's a reason right there to own. So you can build up equity and not have to pay tax on it, and you know, use it for the future. That's what I know from my experience. And I did work for many years. Probably over 20 years. I was a loan officer. I've been a managing broker for over 20 years, and I've been in real estate like over 25 years. And I have a lot of experience in those areas, and I see, you know, the different benefits and the different things that people get, and the things that salespeople tell them that they can get, like tax advantages that they really can't, just to sell them property. So.
Okay.
And
all right, Michael.
Like the market is very volatile this last.
Please continue.
Sorry about that.
Okay. So, Michael, can you please tell us a bit more about some ways in which people can empower themselves, or what people should go out and look for when they look into property? I mean, Edward's just elaborated on a reason to want to consider investment in real estate, a means by avoiding capital gains tax and payment of that if you reside within that property for a certain period of time. If you could just elaborate on how people that may be struggling with their day-to-day even consider a possible investment. Is that at all a likelihood? And what would you look for, or what would you suggest?
Yeah, so I think, you know, all of the points that have been made are quite fair. And you know, I understand that there are systemic issues that have kind of led to where we're at, you know, nowadays. I think that so many, you know, minorities and women and different classes of people have been kind of, you know, subject to a lot of issues, including the redlining, including predatory lending, especially before the housing market crash in 2008. But that being said, while those systemic issues still exist, there is a lot of opportunity for individuals in a lot of different areas and a lot of different income levels to access property. And so I think that we're kind of discussing initially property from the perspective of owning it as a liability versus the very, you know, rich dad, poor dad, Robert Kiyosaki idea of looking at it as an asset and looking at property as a potential cash flow for you. And so you've got this opportunity as a home buyer in today's market to potentially buy up to 4 units with the same exact loan that you would use to buy a single family home. And while there are those issues that, you know, were brought up initially about, you know, whether or not it's something that we should be doing where one person owns and the other people rent, it's just a fact of the world that we're living in, that is something that is so ingrained in our society and society in general across the world, that there are going to be people that own and there's going to be people that rent. And it's whether it comes down to, you know, reasons behind it that are personal or based in your finances. So some people just prefer the flexibility of being able to rent and move on with their lives. Some people just don't have the credit or potentially the financial means. But that's something I kind of wanted to dip into because I do think that there are a lot of ways to access property that don't necessarily require you to have any money. There's a lot of different strategies. I purchased 2 properties last year where they are fixer uppers. We're in the process of fixing them up right now. And I don't come from money. I, you know, have had to find creative ways to get to where I'm at. And so the only limits to me getting to, you know, these 2 properties was my creativity, which was the owner was struggling to sell them. And so I made him a part owner in an LLC as long as he quit claim the properties to me. So I was able to access 2 properties and have 93.5% equity in these properties just by negotiating him having an ownership stake in the finished product rather than giving him upfront capital. And that doesn't, you know, have bounds. You know, the educational limits are the only thing that is going to hold you back from doing something like that. In the Chicagoland area in general, a lot of the young agents that I'm mentoring are from African-American neighborhoods. They have experience in wholesaling. There's a lot of ways that you can get involved in real estate without having to have a ton of upfront capital. And most of my investors, when I'm working with them, are young investors that don't have a lot of money. So we use a lot of creative approaches. We use maybe an FHA loan where you're putting 3.5% down. We're getting a seller credit because we know that in today's market, things are going to appraise even slightly above what they would normally appraise for. And so we're getting a full seller credit where buyers are not having to pay their closing costs. They're essentially mortgaging them. They're not moving into the property for 2 months because that's what the government allows. And so they're buying these fully occupied properties, getting money back, and they're essentially getting into $200,000, $300,000 properties with very little money, you know, less than $5,000 at times. And these are cash flowing properties. And that's the other thing that I wanted to touch on is while there is risk in the market as we sit, I do think that the market is going to be up this year based on a lot of what's going on with the Fed. They're still going to be doing a lot of quantitative easing. We need to make sure that the GDP doesn't slow down too much and the unemployment is still higher than it needs to be. So that's something that the Fed will continue to use. And with that comes lower interest rates and higher real estate prices. But when you're hedging your bet, your best thing to do is to potentially buy that 2 to 4 unit property, but buy it for cash flow. You don't buy it for appreciation. You buy it in such a way that even if the market turns downward, you still have a safe margin of what rental income you're getting from the people that are living in your property versus what you're paying every single month. And that's how you save yourself from a lot of the volatility and the market risk that we're seeing.
Okay.
Is
Well,
that a
that's
long-term
easy.
strategy, Mike, real quick, if you don't mind? Michael, is that a long-term strategy concerning, like, can that be applied by most people within the market? I mean, using it for cash flow instead of appreciation?
Yeah,
Usually,
I mean,
as far as I understand in the past, you bought real estate because it's going to make you more money, like when you go to retire. I mean, just the price goes up. But go ahead, sorry, go ahead.
yeah. So, I mean, basically cash flow is your, ice cream sundae, and appreciation is the cherry on top. You want it, but you should not buy based on that. I mean, there are people that do, and there are areas in Chicago that are projected to have better growth than others. I mean, you look at Humboldt Park, you look at, areas in South Shore, Hyde Park, there's a lot of areas in Chicago that are, on the outskirts of areas that have already kind of boomed. And so you can reasonably project some level of appreciation, but that does, expose you to macroeconomic factors that you can't predict. Nobody could have predicted what would happen this year. Nobody really, I mean, some people predicted 2008, but not a lot of people saw that coming. So there are macroeconomic risk factors. So you buy for cash flow and you hope for appreciation. And so even if you're buying a property that never increases, let's say you buy a $200,000 property, 20 years from now, it's still worth 200,000. But if it's been providing you cash flow every single month, and then on top of that, you're also paying down the mortgage because your cash flow is on top of paying down that mortgage every single month, then you're still gaining a substantial amount of equity on top of the monthly cash flow, basically the dividend that you've been getting every single month. And the strategy that I discussed in terms of, owner occupying, that's something that, I've been able to apply multiple times, because you buy in your first year, you live there, you're required to live there for a year. And then because you've been able to either reduce or completely eliminate your own housing expense, that gives you a lot more capital because you don't have your own mortgage to pay. Your tenants pay your mortgage. I am doing the same thing right now with a condo in Wicker Park. I live with 2 guys who pay my mortgage at the moment. And so rather than paying almost $30,000 in mortgage this year, they've paid it for me. And so I have a lot more capital, which will then allow me to refinance in this new tax year, free up my FHA, and then just do the same thing again and just repeat it and repeat it. And that's something that, as long as you haven't destroyed your credit, as long as you have at least a 620 credit score and some amount of money to put down, 3.5% on even a small property with a closing cost credit is not going to, kill you. Now that I understand there are people that can't afford that, and there's other strategies that they can potentially use that we could dive deeper into if we wanted to. Those things are like seller financing or wholesaling, like I mentioned. But it is a process that is repeatable. It's not going to make you, rich very quickly, but it is something that you can use to build wealth over time.
So, Michael, I have a question for you. Now that we're in the COVID era and more people are not having the jobs to pay the rent, and the rent is not paid, and I feel, sorry for them, and I also feel sorry for the landlords, because some landlords are really banking on that as their income. So if the landlords do not receive that rent, they do not get paid, they do not feed their families. Now, what are your thoughts on now the renters who can't afford to live there? Is it just evict, or is there another possible way that things can happen?
Yeah, so that's a tough one. And the reason that it's so tough is because I think that, you watch news stories and you see the way that it's kind of portrayed as, the landlord who's, evicting their tenant even though COVID's going on. But, I think a lot of that, fails to kind of realize that a lot of these landlords, this might be the only property that they own. And, they might have bought something just dabbling in real estate. It's not like every landlord is, a massive property management company that owns, millions and millions in assets. The guy that is renting out the duplex to you, the one side and the other, he might be, struggling to make his own mortgage payment. And he just happened to have bought that and then didn't sell it and just kept it as a rental property when he moved into his house with his wife or something like that. So it does bring up a pretty tough dilemma, because I think that this is where we're in an unprecedented time, that it would have been beneficial for the government to kind of step in and try and do something about it. And I don't think that enough was done on either side, to be honest. There's just a lot of people who are not able to pay their rent, but then there's a lot of landlords that maybe they did apply for a 3-month forbearance. I'm selling a property right now for a landlord that just couldn't afford it. She lost her tenant. She had to file a forbearance. She's been really struggling money-wise, and so she had to sell the property, and she's not going to even get that much out of it because it was something that she had gotten into recently. So I think it's just overall a really tough situation. And for me, I've been fortunate that I've got tenants that had stable jobs, but there is some risk there. And I think that you want to get into real estate if you can afford some downturn. But I think this is a downturn that nobody really planned for, and the government dropped the ball a little bit on how much they could have been helping to normalize the situation.
What do you think that would, if it was a perfect world and you can, your idea would become law and happen, what would it be?
I mean, that's such a tough one again, because, if you allow essentially unlimited forbearance during the time of COVID, while the tenants are able to avoid eviction, then you're also hurting the lenders. And so then that causes larger macroeconomic issues with the lenders, and, there's just so many ramifications that come from it. So I do think that some governments, programs that should have been set up, much in the way of like the SBA loans, or the paycheck protection programs, should have probably been given out over the last year to landlords who have the ability to prove that their tenants aren't able to pay and aren't paying. There's so much money in some of these bills that have been, getting passed or getting discussed, that could have gone more towards people in the US. But I don't want to say that would be, the ultimate solution, just because we're talking incredible, unimaginable amounts of money that are being lost right now by landlords, and that are not being paid by tenants all across the country and probably all across the world. So I'll be honest, I want to tell you that there is a law, there is something that would fix it, but I just think we're in such an unprecedented time that there really is no perfect solution.
Okay.
Yeah, no.
So, I was going to ask you to comment, Ed. Please do.
Yeah, no, the only thing that could be a total fix on the real estate side of it was basically more like unemployment or universal basic income, so that people wouldn't have an excuse not to make their payments. However, just like if you look at 2006, 2007, we had the lowest interest rates ever, and the market was booming and blah, blah, blah. I may be shooting myself in the foot with my clients, but I'm basically telling a lot of my clients, hold off. We're about ready to have another big, huge drop in the market, even though realtors are saying, oh no, it's the greatest time ever, lowest interest rates ever. They were saying that back then too. Well, that's the situation. And on top of that, you not only have to make up for any market decrease, but now because of COVID-19, people are realizing that they can telecommute, they can work remotely. And so rent, especially in big cities, is crashing. Like they were just talking about a 1-bedroom in San Francisco was was between $3,600 and $3,900 a month. Well, now the people are moving out because they can go to Sacramento and pay half the price. Sorry, that that landlord is not going to be able to get that money anymore. We're getting a very good realization of how much control we actually have. And a lot of the companies that are in the inner city that are, downtown, that are paying these exorbitant rent for these officers, saying, wait a minute, if this is this easy for people to do their work remotely, why are we renting this? And now you're getting like an 8% drop in commercial in the city too. That is going to impact real estate and on the residential side. No way it can't. No. I have so many friends in California. Well, I have clients in 42 states, but in California, I have a bunch of friends that have already moved to either Arizona, Texas, or Nevada for lower taxes, which is why a lot of people are leaving Illinois, and to get away from the big city where I'm paying too much. One guy, he's a loan officer. He does only reverse mortgages. He lived in Irvine. He said, for what I pay to rent in Irvine, I can buy, that's my less than my mortgage payment to buy a house, and I'm renting a room out of the house to my roommate that I used to split the place with in Irvine. And that's, so rents in the cities are, there's Jeremy Rifkin was predicting it in the 70s that large cities are not going to be able to sustain themselves. And in Chicago, for example, we already see where the mayor sold off the Skyway, the mayor sold off the parking meters, the mayor is selling off all the revenue. Then where's it all coming from? Taxes? Yeah. And guess what? People are going to move. Look at how many people were outraged right away over the sugar tax on the soft drinks.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And you're going to so now if I find out, because of COVID-19, my boss is letting me work remotely, and my boss, I'm actually getting in more work time, or I'm getting more work done, and he's impressed, and I'm liking this situation because I can work in my pajamas if I want to. And then, real estate's going to take a pretty serious hit soon. So, and I did call it in 2008, and I even called in August of 2007, the Fed, Chase, Goldman Sachs, they all said interest rates are going to be 7% by December of 2007. I told everybody in my office, and we were having a big forum one night. I said, it's not going anywhere near 7. And they said, what? Are you kidding, Ed? The Fed just said blah, blah, blah. I said, I don't care. If the interest rate goes up, the economy spirals. And as soon as they tried to even move a little bit, people started freaking and they pulled it right back down. Well, guess what? Since 2007, it's now 13 years later, we haven't even been anywhere near 6%, 5%. Where's the 7%? It ain't happening. And now we're even lower rates than we were back then. It's because we're heading into a collapse and they're trying to stimulate things any way they can. And that's only kicking the can down the road. So right now, those people like David mentioned that are more interested in being freed up or being able to move on, they're going to be the prevalent way of thinking. Unless, of course, and I do see this sometimes too, multiple people buying a place together. Then it makes it more cost feasible. And now you can dip your foot in faster, or you can get a little bit more for a little bit less. Those kind of situations are going to be happening a lot too, because it might take, one member of a 2-member household could very easily be unemployed in these times. So especially not only because of COVID, because of automation is costing people jobs too. So real estate is could be a big burden soon, you know, and they're already seeing foreclosures up, you know, they're already seeing where people are even on their credit cards and car loans are the most 90-day delinquents in a long damn time. And I do bankruptcies in one of my businesses, and bankruptcies are already up. So it's all there. The writing's on the wall.
Okay. So what do you have to say to all of that, Michael? Is there anything that you'd like to add or possibly rebut perhaps, or look at it in a different frame?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're all very valid and reasonable points. And, you know, I like to think that I'm as honest as I can be with, you know, the clients that I'm working with. I've got a guy that is, you know, looking for properties, you know, well over $1 million, you know, up in the North Shore. And I told him, you know, I'm going to be honest with you, like, I don't think it's a bad time to buy, because I think that if you can lock in the level of interest rates that we're seeing right now, for 30 years, then it makes a lot of financial sense, but you have to be prepared to live there for several years. If you have any plans of moving in the next couple of years, then I don't think it's a reasonable time to be jumping into something, especially something so expensive. We saw a 5-year recovery in the 2008 crash, and you know, it's tough for me to even speculate on, you know, what the level of a crash that we could see would be. And it's, you know, different economic factors that are contributing to what could potentially be a crash come 2022. But that being said, I'm still urging people to be a bit cautious. And, you know, I think that being cautious, you know, is one of two things. It's either, you know, just being aware that if you're going to be buying property, that you may need to hunker down for a little while, you know, a couple of years at the very least, because if you try and sell your property in the next couple of years, you may run into trouble. Either that, or, you know, just because I work with so many investors, not all of the people that come to me are already investors. I talk people into the idea of investing for cash flow and the benefits that can bring to them. And so I think that, again, it's kind of what I discussed before, that if you're banking on appreciation or you're banking on the overall value of your property, then that can lead to issues, especially when there's greater macroeconomic factors that are creating risk. But if you're buying properties that have, you know, a substantial amount of cash flow, I mean, I sold a property to a kid in Joliet. It was a 3-unit. It's not the best area of Joliet, but he heavily screens his tenants, and he's getting $2,500 a month, and he's paying $1,200 for his mortgage. And so even if we see some pretty substantial downturn in the market, he has a level of safety and a margin of safety there that he's probably going to be okay. And so I think it's just kind of picking and choosing what you're getting into and knowing the risks that are inherent. But I do agree that I'm seeing a lot of, you know, people that are getting behind on their mortgage. And I work with 2 different short sale specialists that are sending me referrals, and they're already telling me that next year we're, you know, all going to be very busy. And so there is a lot of concern in the market, and there are a lot of people that are being led into things. But it, you know, if you can lock up, you know, 2.75 for 30 years, you know, on any sort of investment, given that the average return of the stock market since 1925 is between 6 and 7%, I do think that there is some merit and some validity in potentially investing now in real estate if you're confident that you're going to stay in it for a while.
Yeah, I'm not thinking that it's going to necessarily be as bad as 2008. I do think the stock market's going to drop more, but I don't think the housing market might be as bad as 2008. But we are going to see similar circumstances, similar amounts of foreclosures, similar amounts of short sale business, but not as bad as 2008. That's my opinion. It could be worse, but I don't think so.
Okay. So Michael, you talk a lot about cash flow. How do you work out what this cash flow is? I mean, can you give us an example of a situation that would be beneficial for someone? I mean, you indicated the 4-unit scenario. Is that the best option for a person looking to invest?
Yeah, I mean, if you can find a 4-unit in the Chicagoland area, they are tougher to find than some other areas. But 3 units, 2 units, there's a decent amount of those. And so, I could kind of throw it back to the kid that bought the place in Joliet, and it was a 3-unit property. It is not the most beautiful looking property. It's kind of in the middle of an industrial area. It has been given, the city of Joliet approved it as, even though it was non-conforming. And so it is able to maintain its status as a 3-unit property, even though it's in an area that's zoned more industrial. It's right next to railroad tracks. And so there's a lot of factors that led to it being cheaper. Also the fact that, there's lower socioeconomic in the Joliet area. But with that comes, higher rent to price ratios, and what's called cap rate, which is essentially a hedge against certain risks like vacancy risk and, just general risks that you find in lower socioeconomic areas, higher crime, potentially a tougher ability to rent your property out. But that being said, I mean, the kid used what was called a home possible loan, which allowed him to put only 5% down on a multifamily property. We were able to get him a full 3% seller credit, which is the max that you're able to get when you're putting down less than 10%. And then the property easily appraised. It appraised $20,000 above what we got it for. We got it for $181,000. And, that was all a product of just, buying in a market that is just a little bit less desirable in a price point that isn't being attacked by, larger institutional buyers. Like these 2 to 4 unit properties are not being bought up by, REITs and that kind of thing. So it's kind of a little niche market that anybody can take advantage of. And the kid is also, not moved into the property yet because it was something that he just purchased and he had that 60-day window. So he made $5,000 back in his first 2 months because he just got paid for January before ever moving in. And so when he's only putting down, $9,000, he's getting $5,000 back in the first, 2 months. And now he's getting a cash flow of, well, let me quickly explain the cash flow. He's getting about $1,200 on top of his mortgage. But in order to calculate your cash flow, you have to take that amount, and then you have to take probably at least 20% reserves just to be safe early on in any investment. So he's putting away about $500 a month, potentially a little bit more because it may be a little bit sooner that he needs a roof. But there's factors that you consider when you're calculating what your reserves need to be. But ultimately, he's taking somewhere between $500 and $700 a month of reserves, and then he's still got anywhere from $500 to $700 of cash flow that he's getting per month after reserves from this property. So realistically, calculating your cash flow is just coming down to what is your rental income, what is your mortgage payment, and then what reserves do you need to take as a percentage of what your monthly rental income is. And then whatever's left over is the difference between your mortgage payment and your monthly rental income minus reserves. And so when you're looking at any property, that's how you want to end up calculating it. And if you have one that is providing a decent amount of cash flow, then, it's worth exploring.
Yeah, and when he says reserves, he's also including the utility bill for the common elements, any expenses, any repairs that have to be made, if he has to pay taxes separate, if he has to, have a homeowner's policy. Sometimes the taxes in the homeowner's policy are built into the mortgage payment. But if they're not, and you're doing them separate, then you got to count that out of your expenses too. And then what's left over is your cash flow. How much is going your pocket every month.
Yeah, and I do advise, there's multiple different categories. And so the categories that are included in taking your reserves are CapEx, which is short for capital expenditures. Those are things that are big time costs, like could be cracks in the foundation, could be your roof, siding, that kind of stuff. Your furnace, your hot water heater. Then you have regular repairs, maintenance. There's general upkeep. If you get a leaky faucet and you need to hire a handyman. And then you also want to take reserves for vacancy. You don't want to have a situation where you have a month of vacancy when somebody moves out and you're not able to get it rented right away and it dips into your own pocket. You want that to come out of your reserves. And then I always do advise investors early on in their investing career to take property management reserves and to essentially, if they want to pay themselves out of that reserve, they can do that. But the aim of any investor over time is to become, it's never completely passive, but passive enough to where they can hire a property management company and be pretty standoffish. And so you do want to calculate what that eventual expense is going to be, which is probably between 7 and potentially up to 12% if you're a small time investor and you've only got one small property. But you want to factor that in even when you're managing your own property, because you don't want to get stuck in a situation where you can never hand it off to a property management company. So, you change your reserves a little bit depending on the age of the property, depending on the vacancy, the average vacancy in the areas that you're looking, which can be found on multiple different websites, including USA.com. But ultimately, it ends up being probably somewhere between 15 and 25% reserves that you end up needing to take. So that 20% mark is kind of split down the middle. But it's important to take those because I come across so many, for lack of a better way of putting it, mom and pop landlords that, are getting $2,000 rent a month and they've got an $1,850 mortgage. And so they think that they're cash flowing, but they're dipping into their pocket every single time something goes wrong, and they end up being, negative on that investment. And it's not a horrible thing because they're also paying down the mortgage. They're probably seeing some level of appreciation. So their net worth is ultimately probably still going up, but you want positive ROI if you can get it, and it can be had.
Yeah, and a lot of times also you get something on your taxes called depreciation. So a lot of your cash flows can wind up coming to you with no taxes in that tax year, just because of the depreciation you're writing off. So there are many advantages, especially if you're using a property as a rental property too. So.
All right. So a lot of the people, especially in Illinois, complain about the level of land tax. I'm going to present this issue to Ed because he also has an accounting background. What can Illinois policymakers do? Do you feel that level of land tax is justifiable?
You mean property tax?
Yeah, property, land tax.
Yeah, property tax. See, a lot of people, I do have a lot of my clients saying, I'm moving to Indiana because the taxes are lower. Yeah, maybe Indiana's real estate taxes per value of property is lower, but there's a lot of things to consider. For example, let's say you go run to Indiana, but you still got your job in Illinois because there ain't no jobs over in Indiana. So you might have lower real estate taxes. Your state taxes may be similar. And some people say, no, they got lower income tax in Indiana. Yeah, but they got a county income tax too that we don't have. And then you got all the time you're driving to your job and you're paying for the vehicle and the gasoline to drive there or public transportation or whatever. So basically you're paying for what you get. If you live in an area which has high real estate taxes, it's because it has a lot more parks and a lot more benefits and a lot more everything. So it all depends. Do you want to be in that area so that you can walk to those amenities? Or if you don't mind, then move to where there's lower taxes like the suburbs and or Indiana. I don't like taxes, but I do realize the benefit of them in many situations. And our real estate taxes pay for a lot of things that we think our income tax does. Like, for example, your real estate taxes are what are paying for the local schools and the local libraries and the local police and the local fire department and the things that are important to you. So if you have higher taxes, there's a reason. They're not indiscriminate usually. Now, I'm not saying that they couldn't lower them. I'm not saying that there's not waste, because there is. We know there is. Even if you say, well, I like schools, and I do, but we know I just watched a school have to buy a whole bunch of iPads and stuff just because they had to kill their budget. They had to spend the money or they would lose it in the upcoming budget. So they literally wasted it. So, and that's built into your real estate taxes too. But overall, that happens everywhere too. That happens in Indiana too, just to a different ratio. So.
Yeah, but on that note, Mike, if you don't mind, Ed, sorry. The whole notion of the 67% of property taxes, I had Holly Kim on my show, the Lake County Treasurer. 67% of the taxes of Lake County, property taxes, go to schools, but they go to the local areas of the schools. So they're not really distributed equally. This is part of the problem, is that it causes these massive segregation and disparities in education quality. Poorer areas have worse schools, richer areas have better schools. That's not okay. How is it the kids' fault that, real estate over here is more expensive or higher value than over here? Everybody should have a fair access to good education. So the actual allocation of these taxes is not, I understand what you're saying. Like, if you don't like it, go to, if you don't like, the high taxes, go to Indiana or whatever else. But I don't think that really solves the social or economic problem concerning taxation and what it's supposed to do for people. That's all.
Right. And well, funny that you mentioned that too, because what they do, like, for example, I saw this in Where to Invade Next, which was a Michael Moore documentary. And I don't agree with everything he says, but this was a valid point. In France, the money that they gather for the schools for taxes gets distributed equally out throughout the entire country. So if you're in a poor neighborhood in Paris or a rich neighborhood somewhere else, your kids will get the same education and even the same school lunch, because what they do is they gather it all together for the whole state, the whole country, and then they spread it out. Whereas like a expensive neighborhood like Hinsdale might have everything, but the city in Chicago, they don't have hardly nothing. They're not letting my kids bring home iPads. They'd be scared of the kids bringing home iPads in some cities, schools. Well, that's not fair then. Then they're not getting equal access to education and information. So. Right.
And the importance of education is so fundamental. And that's why I would bring it up. And I wanted to ask you, Michael, do you think that there should be more or less or the same amount of like government regulation in real estate? I do you too. Concerning, there's obviously a lot because you have to make sure the houses are safe and that kind of thing. But like, as far as like rent goes, do you think there should be some sort of, not necessarily federal, but maybe local, just some sort of governmental cap on rent? Like you were talking about San Francisco and how high the rent is there. I know somebody who lives out here in my area. They're obviously doing very well. She also has a apartment or it's an apartment in San Francisco that costs $6,000 a month. Obviously, they're very wealthy. They can afford both. But that's ridiculous. That's just stupid that a single unit would cost $6,000 a month.
There's many that cost more than that.
I'm sure you're wrong. It just gets dumber the higher the money. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but here's the thing. The only way you can cap rent is if you cap values of property. Because rent is based on values. So,
yeah, I do think that you'll run into systemic issues if you do that with, kind of, what was just brought up. If you if you cap rents, then you're going to end up with a situation where you don't have landlords. I think one of the best, examples that we can turn to is the, fact that the government has made these, opportunity zones. And I don't know how much you guys are familiar with opportunity zone development, but essentially the government said in as simple a terms as I can explain it is that they don't have the ability to fix up all of these downtrodden areas. And so what they did is they gave tons of tax benefits and even, complete tax deferrals if you develop and then sell and rebuy in opportunity zones. And now I do think that, it's kind of a side note, there needs to be some revamping of it. And Joe Biden has expressed that he's going to do some, revamping of the program because not every opportunity zone is really an opportunity zone. But that notwithstanding, essentially what the government was admitting when they developed these opportunity zones is we don't have the capability to do this. What we need to do is we need to incentivize the private sector. And so I think that if you have government caps on rent, you're going to disincentivize the private sector from buying property. And then what you're going to end up with is you're going to end up with a situation where housing is even more screwed up because people are not going to be able to afford to buy these and rent them out. And then you're going to end up with a situation where there's less landlords. The government might have to take over property. There's going to be a lot of property that isn't bought because landlords don't see the value, the return on investment from it. I can just, I don't want to speculate on how far down the rabbit hole to go, but I do think that it would become a very, very, people hate this word, but essentially, either socialized or communistic type system. And I don't mean to use communist as a bad term. In the very, pure Karl Marxian, aspect of communism is essentially equality. But when you take away the free capital, aspect of it, there can be a lot of negative ramifications. And I'm by no means, a pure believer in pure capitalism. I think that we've seen some negative impacts of the funneling of money upward. And I do think that there should be more socialistic aspects into our free market capitalism. But I think we need to be careful about how far we go on that.
Well, and you could get away with it if you capped cost of living and made sure that pay was in line, was proportional to cost of living. Then you'd never have that problem. So if property values went up in a certain area, incomes went up in that same area too. But that's a complicated process of civil engineering. That how you going to get everybody to cooperate in a complex system like that? It could be done, but you'd need to do that in order to really truly have caps that didn't hurt one party or another.
And I think that the funny, rebuttal to that is almost, how do we solve that? How do we have a system that regulates itself? And that's essentially what free market capitalism is. And so I do think that, if you don't want to pay, $6,000 a month, that, maybe you don't. And I do get the argument of it. There are areas where people are being priced out of areas that they've, always lived. And so there's certainly solutions. Now, I don't know what the perfect solutions are. The voucher program, the Section 8 program, has been beneficial to an extent, but I even think there's, enough problems with that just because sometimes that can even push up rent because the government gives away so much for Section 8. So again, it's one of those things where it's a really complex answer. Otherwise, we would probably already have a solution to it.
Okay. Are you able to elaborate for us the types of loans or grants that are available, or maybe Ed's able to chime in between the one of you or the two of you? Can we have someone talk a bit more about certain opportunities that are available to people in some way of assistance or of some form at least?
There's a million different programs, and each, it's like someone said, the golden rule, he who has the gold rules. Well, whoever's loaning you the money can make the rules for the loans. For example, someone could say, we're only loaning to people who are 20% down. Some people will say, we'll loan if you only have 5% down. At one time in 2006 and 2007, it was, you didn't have to have nothing down and you didn't have to prove your income. Now,
Cool.
you can still get facets of those loans. Like, for example, I just inquired for somebody that wanted to buy a home in the western suburbs of Chicago. The loan officer said the only way we can do this loan is if they're 30% down. Then we don't have to count their income because their credit score was lower. If their credit score would have been in the upper sevens, they would have treated her totally different. You know, there's a million different types of loans, and there's people who do private loans too. Like if I own the house and you want to buy it from me, you and I could work out terms where I could say, you're going to give me $1,000 a month. I'm going to count 100 of it towards your down payment when you refinance and buy me out, blah, blah, blah. There's a million loans. Just the conventional loans, there's dozens of different types. So
it's on a case-to-case basis, and that's the simple answer to that. And what about credit scores? I mean, how do people in today's time go about improving their credit? Is there any tips that either of you could give?
Well, a lot of times, and we do credit report repair after we do bankruptcies in almost every case. And a lot of people don't realize it, but your credit score, they think your credit score is to tell whether you're a good or bad risk. It's not. It's to hold over your head to get you to pay. And even even one of the vice president or president of Nicor Gas even said, we're going to start reporting your gas bill on your credit report. This was a couple years ago, because then we know people will pay on time because they don't want their credit messed up. And sure enough, he got a better rate of return that way. Now it costs a little tiny bit of money each time they make a report. Like I used to be on the credit committee and the board of directors of a credit union. We never reported anybody's loans to the 3 repositories. The reason why we just didn't want to pay the fees. And we knew the clients well enough that we thought, you know what, we know, by our studying our clients, we know what they have, what they can do, and we know whether to grant the loan. And we didn't have a very big loss. I think in the many years that I worked there, I think we repoed 3 cars. That's it. That's how our success was that good. And we didn't even have to go after those people when we repoed their car because our profits were so good. But that's when we get a client who we've done a bankruptcy for, and now they owe their creditors nothing, that's when we dispute their credit. Well, the same thing applies now. If you don't owe on a bill and you had a late payment 6 months ago, you can dispute that. And lots of times it'll fall off the record, because if your record is good or your balance is 0 or you're regularly on time, they don't want to take the time to fill out that report. And if they don't fill it out within 30 days and get it back, that's removed from your credit. So like I'll have somebody that did a bankruptcy, and after the bankruptcy, we'll dispute every single item on their credit with the very vague dispute of multiple inaccuracies. And technically, they threaten you. They say, if you dispute something that's fair, you can be in trouble. But every single report technically has 2 errors in it. The 2 errors are your account number, because they put X's in it. So technically, it's not your account number. And they always round your debt to the nearest dollar. Well, then doesn't have the cents in it. So technically, that's wrong too. So technically, you do have multiple inaccuracies. Well, if that person no longer owes that debt, and the dispute comes into them, and they look at it, they look up your account, they see they can't get any money from you, they wad that up and throw it in the garbage. Why am I going to prove? Because he said multiple inaccuracies. The credit repository now wants you to verify every single thing on that credit. So they have to do the most amount of work for no money because they can't get any money from you because you either settled that debt or you did a bankruptcy. And so they don't respond within 30 days. All the derogatories come off your credit. And then you got programs like BMO Harris has a program called Credit Builders. You go in there, you tell them you want a CD for $5,000. They give you a CD with their money. And then they give you a payment plan to pay off the loan for that CD. Now your CD might get you 1.something% interest. Your loan might be at 6% interest. So you're going to lose about 5%. But after you've been paying a couple of years, that CD is now yours. You can use it for a down payment, and and they make it look like you paid a loan for 3 years successfully. And that down is a good thing for your credit. You also want to keep your balances lower too. Like if you get to the point where you owe 35% of all your balances, like what your credit limits are, that dings your credit. When you go over 50, that dings your credit more. You go over 65, that dings your credit even more. And the bigger your balance of your credit compared to your credit limit is not good for you. So, but sometimes I've even seen people that did bankruptcies, and within 3 to 4 years, they're eligible for the best rates on the street because they've repaired their credit, reestablished credit, and now they have no debt. And I've seen people who had no bankruptcy on their record, but they have so much debt that they're paying on time, but they have so much debt that their credit's below 620. And they don't even have a bankruptcy. So it all depends on, anyone can manage to get where they want to with some good planning.
Okay. So do you feel the system rewards going bankrupt?
Well, they don't, but they do, and they have to. Like, for example, a country like Lithuania, they don't have personal bankruptcy. You know why? Because they don't have debt the way we do. See, our country was going to collapse probably right around the Great Depression. 50% of people were on soup lines complaining. And debt was considered a very bad thing. It was in the Bible, it was a no-no. It was in the law, it was a no-no. Debt was bad. There was even something in the law books that still exists called the Prohibition of Usury. In other words, interest was prohibited. And the reason for that is because the founders of the law believed that interest was the way that those that have took advantage of those that have not. But when the economy was so bad and nobody had money and the rich didn't want to come off of any, they decided to create debt so they could make money out of nothing. And they started out with home loans. If you could come up with $1,000, we'll give you $4,000. You have a 20% down loan, you can buy a house. And for $5,000, now they got a crew building you a house and people are back to work. And then there was the assembly line cars. And then there was credit cards. And then there was school loans. We're getting to the point, though, that we're all loaned out. And so that's going to come back to haunt us.
So do you think that a possible policy initiative should be, as the Illinois Green Party has endorsed in their platform, is the introduction of public banks? Do you think that that is a possibility of something that could be successful as a model?
Oh, of course, because all they're doing by having a public bank rather than a private bank is a lot of people don't realize with the rule of 72 or the rule of compounding, banks make a lot of money, way more than we think. But then they also have something called fractional reserve. And that's where a bank only has to hold 10% in reserve. Meaning that if I deposit 10,000, they're supposed to hold 1,000 and they can lend out 9. But instead what they do is they hold my whole 10 and they lend out 90. Where'd the 90 come from? That's fractional reserve. They just make it up. It's an simple accounting process. And as a result, when you think the bank is making, double or triple their money, then multiply that times 9. That's what they're making. So right now, for example, if all the school loans were forgiven, that wouldn't even hurt the banking industry. It really wouldn't. It sounds like it would because we have trillion something in school loan debt, but it wouldn't because they've already made that money back manyfold. but people don't realize it because we think short-sighted. We only think of what's right in front of our face. Banks think long-term. They use the law of large numbers, the law of compounding, or the rule of compounding, fractional reserve, and they're just rolling in dough. And we have no clue how much money they're really making. And that's why credit card companies could take over failing credit card companies. And reporters have asked them, are you sure you want to do that? And they literally say, are you kidding? We're making a fortune. Yeah, it's that simple. So would a public bank be better? Yeah, what that would result in is all of that profit that those private banks are making is now ours. It's now public. Like, why do we have a Federal Reserve? Why do we need them to issue our money? What is the purpose? Their main purpose, stated purpose, was to control inflation and deflation. Are they doing that? No. Inflation and deflation is running rampant. So they're not doing anything that they said they were doing. So why are we letting them control our money? We're crazy.
Okay. My next question is going to be to Michael. Real estate is still the best investment. And that is what a lot of millionaires have to say. Are you able to elaborate on why? And why is it that like people that buy one property end up buying multiple properties? If I could just get you to get into that sort of concept for us.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a ton of different investment tools, but I think that one of the benefits, especially in today's market of real estate, is the fact that you can get loans for such low amounts. I mean, even my investors who are not living in the property are getting as low as 3.5% over 30 years. And like I said, a little bit earlier, the average return on the stock market is between 6 and 7% since 1925. So why would you not put money into something that's only charging you 3.5%? Especially when you consider, for me in the Chicago market, my investors, in terms of cash on cash return, which is what your cash flow is versus your initial investment in your first year, that cash on cash return usually falls somewhere between 10 and 22%. And if we're not hitting 10%, we're not buying it. But I think the underlying, aspect that makes real estate, so powerful is some of the stuff that we've talked about in the past. I mean, there's a physical asset behind it. And not only that, it's something that typically over the course of the history of this country and pretty much the history of the entire world has always gone up. Now, does it always go up over a 1 to 3 year period? No. Does it always go up over a 3 to 5 year period? No. But does it go up over a 10 to 20 year period? Historically, the answer has always been yes. And, I don't want to predict into the future, but I also don't want to, go against historical data that has seemingly indicated that it's over time always going to rise in value. And there's multiple factors that go into that. There is the fact that we see consistent inflation. So, and that had come down to an analysis. I forget who brought it up earlier, but something, along the lines of how affordable is housing versus wages. So there is some aspect to the fact that even though it's going up in value, it may or may not be as affordable as it used to. But in terms of an investment tool, in terms of the return on investment that my, buyers typically see, there is the fact that we're getting somewhere between 10 and 22%. There is risk to it, but you're also then not even counting the potential for appreciation into that. You're not counting the fact that you're paying down the mortgage. I think this school of thought kind of comes from the Warren Buffett school of thought, in that if your investment is earning you more than it's charging you, then you should be using leverage as much as you can. And this is a leveraged tool. You can leverage in other aspects of investing, but not to the same degree that you can leverage in real estate. I can leverage myself using options, for example, in the stock market, but that's risky and that's more short term. That's not what options were even intended for. Options were intended to be hedges against larger long and short positions. So there are a lot of benefits to it, but I think the biggest one is just the fact that the returns seem to be higher and typically safer if you're buying, safely. There are risky aspects of real estate, and there are definitely people that lose in real estate. But there's a large educational aspect to it that if you inform yourself and you have a lot better idea of what you're doing, it can be a lot safer investment than, perhaps the stock market, where trying to figure all of that out is very, very complex. And I have an MBA in finance, specifically in stock market finance, but it is still a very, very complicated world that is being dominated by computer algorithms. And that is something that has not quite happened in the real estate market. So there is a lot more potential for your everyday investor to learn a little bit and still make money in that market, because it's just not as efficient as something like the stock market.
Okay. So what do you say as would be the number one reason as to why people would be hesitant in investing or buying? Is it easy to do in the USA, or should the government be introducing measures to assist the public at large?
Well, I think that the biggest thing that I hear is, what if the tenants don't pay rent? Then what are you going to do? And of course, that is a concern. And that's even more of a concern now that with COVID going on. But I do think that it is something that is pretty well modulated by the, free market. I would not necessarily be a fan, and it's something that I'm never going to close my mind off to potential options, because I have not done enough research into what the potential impacts could be of some governmental control of this. But I do think that the free market does modulate this quite well. And, there is opportunity for people in all walks of life. We talked very early on in the conversation about redlining and about, the predatory lending that used to go on, and hopefully is not still going on to the same degree, although I'm not ignorant, and I'm not going to assume that it's not still happening to a degree. But there is opportunity for people to break into this with little to no money. Like, I brought up the thing of wholesaling. Wholesaling is just a hustle game. If you can find people that have dilapidated properties and you're able to buy it for $25,000 and just assign the contract to somebody for 30 and make a quick $5, you need almost no education except for 1 or 2 books or a podcast here and there. So you can come from any walk of life. You need no money because you never actually put money down on the property. I just think that having the free market modulated allows for more opportunity than it's worth taking away by, changing the way that it's regulated.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank the panel today for this session. I've learned a lot myself, and I'm sure everybody else has. And we've just tried to be educative in the presentation, geared towards the audience that could potentially be listening in. And we've discussed various concepts and various policy measures that could be considered. We do know that the tenancy landlord agreement here in Illinois does sort of sway in favor of the tenant. But having said that, there are also reasons to consider investing in real estate. We don't know where we are headed when it comes to how the pandemic affects us, especially when it comes to where populations will now tend to form. We are seeing cities now vacate due to the pandemic. People are preferring rural environments, and how this is going to impact us in the future is yet to be seen. But this was a very mind-provoking conversation as we speak, and I'm sure there were a lot of questions and a lot of issues that were raised tonight that are on the viewers' minds. So thank you all. And we look forward to having these in the future as well.
All right.
Have a great
Thank you.
day.
Thank you, Michael.